So let's talk about Bidenomics, because it turns out it was all fake. So I don't know if you saw this, but there was this this article, and I picked a
spoiler alert.
Yes, I picked a nice lefty publication for this, CNBC. Non-farm payroll growth will rise down by 800,000, Labour Department says. Let's talk about why that's actually pretty significant. So this goes back to, basically, you get these numbers that come out that are key economic indicators of how things are going. Now, when these jobs numbers come out, billions get shifted around in the financial markets. I mean, there are traders who wait for this, and then the moment it comes out, it triggers all sorts. So it absolutely, this is probably the fundamental number that the US government produces on how many jobs are being produced. And you always expect it to be a little bit off, because what they do is they say, okay, well, our estimate based on the early evidence is that it was this number. And then a few months later, they get better numbers and then they update it. So in a normal presidential period, like say under Trump, you get the estimate and then the revision would come through a little bit later on, and it would be a bit different, maybe a bit up, bit down, something like that. And I did a whole series of tweets on these. I've since deleted them because I just decided, since we live in a country where you can be arrested for something you said on Twitter, fuck it, I'm just going to go and delete all my old tweets from before when I was a public person, because I was probably a little bit less careful then. But I had a great series of tweets on this early in the Biden presidency, where I was like, so how come all of the later revisions are always down? Right, because if it was just a sampling error, you just made a slight incorrect assumption or something like that, or you leaned a little bit, whatever it was, and you got the better numbers, you would expect it to be a coin flip. Like sometimes they're up, sometimes they're down.
Sure, and also, I'm no expert, but 800,000 seems like a lot.
Well, that is the monster of it. So I mean, it was always getting revised down by like 50,000, 100,000, something like that. And I mean, but the thing is, it happened every single time. Like you could in theory go to the casino and put your money on red on the roulette and win 100 times in a row. Yeah. It's not very likely, but it could happen. Sure. Right? But this, like every single number that came out of the Department of Jobs or whatever, basically all of them, Department of Labour, they always sounded better to begin with, and then got revised down, right?
Sure.
And this culminated in this one towards the end, because I don't know if you remember, but about beginning of this year, something like that, El Lesbos, whatever her name is, the John Pierre, whatever, the woman who does his tweeting for him. Yeah. She was under Biden's name. You were doing all these tweets about, we've created 3 million jobs.
Weren't they just counting people that were going back to work after COVID as well?
Oh, yes, that.
Just counting them as new jobs.
Yes.
It's not new jobs, though.
Yeah. And so it turns out when actually it wasn't 3 million, it was 2.9. And it turns out it wasn't 2.9, it was actually 2.1, which is a monster revision. That is a massive revision. So normally these revisions are like 50,000, 20,000 at a time. Yeah. And then this one came out. Yeah. And they had obviously massively... I mean... Okay, it's technically possible it's a mistake.
Well, I was going to ask. It says there the Bureau of Labour Statistics. Is that what are they? That's actually federal.
Yeah, it's a federal body.
Come under like the Treasury.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be. I mean, in this day and age, you could easily get some tech startup. You could get a whole bunch of them. And we say we're going to run a trial period for 2 years. We're going to have all these startups, and they're all going to estimate the job numbers, and then we'll see which of them come in after all the data's actually available, and we'll see who's got a good track record, and we just use that instead. But no, we have a whole bloody Labour department who do stuff like this, and conveniently always get it wrong when there's a Democrat in the...
That's what I was going to ask. So under the Trump years, it wasn't so much then.
Under Trump, it went both ways, but it was more likely that the headline number was going to be lower. Whereas with Biden, every single time, it's higher.
Got the keys to the kingdom, mate. That's why.
Well, yes, exactly. So anyway, but hang on. What I will quickly tell you about now is apparently we have a donate button. There we go, up there. So if you're listening, trust us on this. But if you're watching, look at the little L thing, and then move to this. There's a donate button. So if you have money that you don't need, we do. So go to that donate button and press it. And then we will have it, which will be a good thing, because we can do more of this and tell you about stuff. Right, moving on. So my point... here we go. So, and
oh, wow, yeah.
So this is Let me scroll down a little bit. So this is the... Well, I can't. That's all right. Somebody who knows how to scroll down. So basically, what we're pointing out here is you get that persistent... Oh, there were a couple that went the other way. There we go. So there were 2. But everything else, there's this persistent trend of over-reporting.
This is just colossal.
Yeah. I mean, somebody's going to try and tell me that's a mistake. So just as he was going into his election period, when there was all that pressure for him to stand down, all of a sudden it looked like he had... that Bidenomics was a thing. We've got all those articles about how Bidenomics is working, blah, 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 all those tweets. Turns out it was complete nonsense. Right. The whole bloody thing. And I think it's more than that, right?
Look at that, wildly overestimated, almost 1.2 million.
Yeah, because the 800,000 was just the last one. Yeah. If you add up all the other ones, actually the overestimate was 1.2 million jobs that never existed.
Which is lying, isn't it? Another way to describe what this is lying and cheating.
It's tractor stats.
It's cheating.
That is certainly a fair way of...
Yeah, but it's a classic Soviet Union tractor stat stuff. And it's like, okay, well, this is an important number, and it's used to base the health of the US economy. And if it's just fake, well, why do you bother doing it? 'Cause people are going to know that if you have a Democrat in office, that this number doesn't mean anything. Yeah. So we're just going to employ hundreds of thousands of civil servants to put it together.
I saw a guy arguing about inflation rates on Twitter the other day. He was just saying, no, look, the whatever US department deals with it is saying that inflation is only 20%. So the price of your groceries has only gone up by 20%. And everyone's like, no, look, I can see I'm paying, here's a receipt. I'm paying twice as much for my weekly groceries now.
And 20% is giant anyway.
Yeah,
giant.
Yeah, 20% is massive.
Right.
But it's double. It's not just 20%.
You have just nailed the key takeaway from this, right? Because if the job numbers are wrong, the GDP numbers are wrong. If the GDP numbers are wrong, the inflation numbers are wrong. Yeah. So exactly what you just said, if all of this is just made up, then all the follow-on figures that come from it. So yeah, of course the inflation numbers are rubbish because... the GDP numbers are rubbish because the jobs numbers are rubbish.
But this guy was just defaulting back to, no, the government said that this was the number, and therefore this is the number. It's like, look, that sort of that hyper-reality isn't real. This is meant to be a reflection or a description of a real reality that it doesn't match. I have a grocery receipt, look. So
Interesting you mentioned the Soviet Union. It got even more out of hand in Maoist China.
Right.
Sort of in the Great Leap Forward period. The cadres at the bottom would fake their results a bit, and then the middle tiers of people would fake it a bit more to please the people above them. And then the people, and it would go on and on and on until Mao hears that we've got a giant surplus of grain when in fact everyone's starving to death.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's a lot worse for them because it's not just like jobs. Okay, jobs, fair enough. But it's actually grain production that is required for people to subsist and live in Mao's China.
Well, I mean, downstream there is a bit of that. I mean,
there will be a bit.
I'll come to that. But where does this get us? Well, I mean, part of the reason why we might have ended up here. Let me see if I'll tell you what. You do the scrolling on that. So this is this is basically the Fed rate, the interest rate the US is paying. So what this means is if the jobs numbers are lower, basically it takes away the final excuse that the Fed have not to cut it. Samson, do you want to... There's a little scrolly bit at the bottom on the blue bar. Why don't you... No, the other side. Pull that over till about 2000 or something. So we've got... Yeah, that's about there. That's fine. So basically, this is the picture we've got. So if you're listening, so basically the interest rate that people have been paying on borrowing, including the government, I should add, that's the important element, it's basically been on the floor for a long time. And then because of the sort of lockdown era inflation, that had to get pushed back up again. But the problem is, you see that long period where it's basically nothing. Yeah. The government got used to, well, let's spend as much money as we can, and that includes borrowing money and spending that, and it's affordable because the rate we're paying is basically zero. Well, when it goes up to there, the government cannot afford it. They cannot afford to pay 5% on their debt. Yeah. Now, what the lowering of the job stuff does is it kind of serves two purposes. One, with Biden, is it made him look good when he needed to look good because there were all these calls for him to resign and he's a bit demented and that kind of stuff. And he's like, no, look, Bidenomics is a thing and it's working. Yeah. And the second thing is, like, now that he's out and Kamala, whatever her name is, she doesn't have to well, she's going to try and pretend that she doesn't need to stand for his record. They can just dump this bad news. That gives them an excuse to lower interest rates, which helps the government out, but also it should give her a bump maybe just in time for the election.
I mean, just the time on the way this gets raised is very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just up till the very end of 2015, it's virtually nothing. Trump comes in, and suddenly there's a bump up. And it keeps going up under Trump until Biden gets in, when it craters back to the floor.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny that, isn't it?
Really makes you think.
But so she's going to want low interest rates to give her that sort of bump for the election.
It's the Department of the Treasury that does this, Janet Yellen, who sets the interest
No, it's
rates.
the Fed.
It's the actual
Fed who sets the Fed rate.
Right.
And there's
Who's the head of the Fed at the moment?
Jerome Powell.
Okay.
But there's the Atlantic Fed, and there's various board members on it, and they have criteria. And if you look at, you have to drill into the minutes of what each of them says. And basically, the holdouts, they've got a whole list of criteria for lowering interest rates, and the holdouts have been, well, the employment numbers are really good, therefore we can't lower rates yet. Well, this whole thing, just conveniently discovering that actually the jobs are shocking, knocks that excuse away. So it's kind of strong-arming the Fed to lower rates in time for her election in November. If one was cynical, one might think that. So this is a betting market, poly market, which is quite good for this sort of stuff. So basically now everybody's thinking, the next thing is going to be a 25% basis cut. Some people are saying it's going to be a bit more than that, but basically, if you add up all of them, I'm not showing all of them here, but if you add up all of them, basically they reckon, but by the election, the interest rate is going to be a percentage point lower, and it's just a question of how they get there. So basically, the free money thing is going to be turned on to give everybody a boost.
It's good for people paying mortgages, at least, assuming their bank or their borrower, or lender rather, actually goes along with it.
It will be good for them, and thus why they're more likely to vote Kamala off, because my mortgage bill has come down, or at least I can buy a house, because they tend to do lifetime mortgages.
Bookies are good for trying to actually understand reality in loads of things.
Well, it costs them money if they don't.
Right. Yeah. Look up what the bookies say about something. Of course, they're not always right. But quite often because they have to be, it's their actual job. They're not interested in spin.
Yeah.
They're actually interested in what's real.
Well, this one is basically just a weight of money that goes in, and it's not always right. So, for example, what's that? It's not Ben Shapiro, it's the other one. Tim Shapiro, who was going to be the VP pick. Yeah, so on the betting markets, he was 90% to win. So it's not always right. It tends to overemphasise a marginal outcome. But yeah, I take your point.
And even bookies can make the wrong calculation of something, of course. Yeah.
So anyway, rates will be coming down just in time for Kamala. Right now, let's also talk about Kamala, whatever, her version of Bidenomics. Is that page 83? Well, it was a bit difficult to read there, but I did pull out the interesting bits, because we're starting to understand now what Kamala is planning to do when she becomes president, which she says she will. I don't know what she knows. But there's a number of interesting proposals that she's got coming down the track. So go with a nice low one. She wants corporation tax up from 21% to at least 28%, but she doesn't rule out 35%.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Just saying, as a business owner, corporation tax is the worst thing that humanity has ever done.
So it was 35%. Trump took it down to 21%, and Trump now wants to take it to 15%.
Good.
She wants to take it back to something close to the 35%.
Take it to 0. Yeah.
Well, if you think that's bad, wait till we get on to the next bad thing, which is not even the worst thing, but this is the next bad thing. Capital gains tax. Right, she wants 45%.
Oh, right. So explain to me, as a moron when it comes to economics, what capital gains tax is.
So let's say you buy a stock, Bitcoin, a building, a business, and then you buy it for $1 million and you sell it for $2 million. Mm-hmm. The capital gain was $1 million. So how much the gain was?
The government wants some of my profit.
They want basically half of it.
Jesus Christ.
Half of it. Now, normally, the way it works for capital gains is...
State-sponsored theft. This is
just theft at this point.
Normally, the way it works is if you make the gain quickly, you pay a high rate, and if you hold it for a longer term, it goes down. Right. So you can't just flip... We can flip things, but you have to pay a high rate of tax. But she wants the long end to be 45%.
Why?
So if you spend 20 years building a business, well, she wants half of it.
Because she's a communist and hates kulaks.
That is true. That's
right.
I admit.
But that is not the worst bit. The worst bit is so bad, it's just kind of funny how bad it is. She wants 25% capital gains of unrealised gains.
Right. So again, talk to me like I'm an economic idiot.
Okay, so let's say you buy a stock at $100, and then it goes up to $200, and you haven't sold it yet. Right. She wants 25% of that.
I haven't sold it yet.
Yes, and if
how does she get 25% of something I haven't sold?
Well, you just presented the demand.
What?
Yes.
So so essentially this is kind of like the Doomsday Book. With William, like, no, I've tallied up. You've got 15 pigs and a cottage, and so I want some money from you. I want some resources from you. It's like, yeah, but I haven't changed anything.
Yeah, there is a very good reason why you pay capital gains tax at the point of sale.
Yeah.
Because you actually have the money and you actually know how much you got for it.
Does this apply to like houses?
Yes.
So if I bought a house and it cost say £500,000, and the government's like, that's nice, good for you. That's a very nice house. It's very expensive. We're going to bring in 15 million new foreigners, and so now your house is £2 million because the housing market has gone up because of all this massive demand. Which is I'm just talking about say a London property here, right, from the sort of late 90s to now. If they were like, right, so we're going to charge you for unrealised gains on that, it's like, no, this is where I live.
Yes.
I'm not selling my house. I live here. So now I have to pay tax on £1.5 million.
Yes. Whether you have the money or not.
It's just theft. It's just a shakedown.
That is
at that
absolutely
point.
like
It's
a mafia.
It's a gangster. Yeah. F you, pay me. Yeah, but it's not quite fair because I haven't sold it. F you, pay me.
It's a nice business. You'd hate for something to happen to it, like government appropriation. So it's literally like a mafia shakedown.
Well, the thing is, you guys get it straight away, but obviously lots of leftists on Twitter are pretending that they don't understand.
Because I don't like paying tax and I want to keep things I own.
Yes. So I'll read the relevant bit of the proposal. The proposal would impose a minimum tax of 25% on total income, generally including unrealised capital gains.
25%. So literally through no fault of your own home could double or triple in value. And they want 25%. I mean, what if it goes up by 4? Then suddenly you have to pay them the value of your own home when you bought it.
So not wanting to stamp on your flow, but it gets so much worse than that. Right.
Jesus. I thought that was bad, you know.
So at the moment, this proposal it applies to people with assets worth more than 100 million.
Right, okay. Well, that's not my problem.
Now, bear in mind...
Eat the rich.
Bear in mind, when the IRS came in, it was targeted at a lot less than 1% of the American population. Right. And now it's basically all of them, unless you're on welfare or in jail. Right. So the IRS now applies to everybody. So the level one with leftists is you need to make them understand, yes, it's saying that it's for people with 100 million, but like even now...
it's going to stop there?
Yeah. So even now, Elizabeth Warren is saying you need to get that down to 50 million. So we've gone from 100 million to 50 million before it's even launched.
Yeah, again, still not my problem. But the thing is, if I'm like just a hot dog vendor in a neighborhood, and the restaurant next door to me is literally getting a mafia shakedown, and Fat Tony turns and says, "You didn't see anything. I don't want to hear anything from you." It's like, yeah, but I don't really want to be in a neighborhood where the mafia are shaking down every other business. I think they might get to me eventually, to be honest.
Yeah. It's certainly not ideal, and if like I say, it's 100 million now, but it will be 50 million before long, and then it'll be 25.
Especially when this doesn't give them the revenue they're expecting.
Yes. So that's the thing. Yeah. So I'll come back to that, but that's where these things always go, because they make a calculation at the beginning of how much money they're going to get, then people change their behaviour, and then they say, okay, we didn't raise as much as we want, but we've already spent the money. Yeah. So instead of 100 million, we're going to bring, and it will come down to 1 million. Maybe it will come down, maybe it'll be 100,000, but eventually it will be 1 million, which is basically a lot of the working class at this point, especially the way inflation has gone up.
If you're a half-decent house, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And the way, if you look at history, the way it always goes, whether it's the Soviet Union or China or Venezuela or Cuba or Cambodia or Vietnam, on and on and on and on, whatever it is, eventually it comes down to the actual kulaks. Yeah. So the richest peasants, basically, just completely normal people.
Yeah.
It will come down to that level.
Hard and just accumulated some goods.
I will give a slight nod. So there is a potential issue here that has some validity. And that is that at the top end, a lot of the very rich, they don't actually ever sell anything. They just borrow against their assets and live off that. So there is a potential issue here. that you could go after. Now, Bill Ackman, who is an investor, basically says, well, you solve it by basically just making the amount that you borrow against your stock taxable, which is the right way of doing this. So basically, if you're selling, if you're using debt instead of a capital gain, then just tax that same amount. It's so much simpler. It would just do what they're trying to do.
It also means I'm not living in a mafia state.
Yeah. It would achieve the same thing, but it's just so much more simple and elegant. But they're doing it the way that they're doing it. And so you gave the example of the house, right? What if it's a stock and the stock goes up and you have a big unrealized gain and then the stock goes down again? So I think
it inevitably will.
Yeah, so I think I've got an example here that somebody worked through. So let's say you bought 100 shares of Zoom in January 2020, just before the pandemic, and you bought them at $75 a share. By the end of the year, they go up to $350. Yep. So you've got an unrealized capital gain of basically 28 grand. You have to pay 28 grand, right? And this is an actual example of what happened.
Well, this is what you've gained, and then the taxes are, as he says, 7 grand almost.
Yeah. So that was your gain, and the tax is 7 grand. And this is a real life example.
Yeah.
Zoom, when we realised that lockdowns weren't going to continue forever, they then crashed back down to $60 a share.
Yeah.
So you lost money on your investment,
and you got taxed,
and you have to pay the tax.
Jesus.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have been dabbling in investment, filthy capitalist. In the first place. No, I'm sure that's what they think.
Yeah, that is what they're going to say.
Speculation is the devil's business.
So
profit is theft.
Yeah.
Tim Waltz, for example, doesn't have any stocks and shares investments at all. He doesn't understand this world. I mean, neither of them, Tim Waltz or Kamala.
Maybe they should speak to Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
Can't be in favour of this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Pelosi is not going to like this at all.
One of the greatest investors of all time, Nancy Pelosi.
But she's not that great. She's only about the 4th greatest. I had a friend of mine call me up on this. I'm like, okay, she's only the 4th greatest investor.
Yeah. But it happened a bit before I got into finance. But just before I got into the finance, we had the whole .com thing.
Yeah.
And one of the things we did, my guys, the venture capitalists did, is we did something called a liquidity preference. So this was basically where a tech founder has this really massive expectation where I think my company is going to be worth 100 billion. And it's like, really? And he's like, yeah, it's definitely going to be worth 100 billion. It's like, okay, fine. We're valued at 100 billion, but we get the first 20 billion. You get nothing from the first 20 billion. And if you really think it's worth 100 billion, that's fine because you get the other 80 billion.
Yeah.
And then we put the money in. And what happened with a lot of them, because of course it was a .com bubble, is that a lot of those companies then got sold for like 11 billion or something. And it went all to the venture capitalist. And the founder didn't get anything. And I've met some of those guys, and they are sore about it. Like 50
no kidding.
Later, yeah. But
at least get greedy though.
Yeah, but at least they walked away with nothing. If we had this system, let's say their company was temporarily valued at 100 billion, they would then get a 25% tax on that. So, like whatever it was,
It's all ideology, isn't it? It's all ideology, and I doubt Kamala Harris has got the first idea.
Oh, she doesn't have a clue.
So it'll just be her economics team around her that apparently seem to be communists, actual Marxist-Leninists or something or other. God knows what exactly. But it's just like, we don't want rich people. We don't want people having money of their own. We want them to be dependent on the state.
I can only assume that's what they're thinking.
But can you imagine working 16-hour days for years and then you're left with nothing but a 25 billion tax bill and nothing else?
But like, come take it. Come get it. I haven't got anything.
I wonder what their policy will be on inheritance tax. That's another thing Reds love. They hate wealth being passed down through the generations.
Apart from theirs.
Well, yeah. Apart from anyway, they can. Yeah. But I bet Kamala Harris or her team will, if they say anything about inheritance tax, it'll be like
100%.
Yeah, 80%.
I'm sure. Didn't Starmer say something? Didn't Labour say something about inheritance?
Labour love hiking.
Well, they've got a budget coming up in October, and they're hinting that it's going to upset a lot of people. So they are going to do some. I mean, I'll come back to that nearer the time.
I just want to say very quickly on inheritance tax, even though we're running out of time, I hate it because it's all money that has already been taxed.
Yes.
The trickle that I'm finally allowed to keep my money, I'm right, keep that in the bank. pass it on to my kids, and the government's just like,
But at least on that, you've actually received the money. You're just losing a lot of this. The Democrats are basically wanting to tax a concept. They're wanting to tax money that you've never received, that you've never got.
Absolutely madness. Just say I would, if I was Lord Protector, I would do away with inheritance tax entirely.
100%.
Yeah.
Like not one penny.
Yeah. There are loads of unjust tax.
But I mean, it gets worse than this, right?
Oh yeah.
So these are the examples of a home or a business. I mean, you think that's bad, but what if you own a farm? Right.
And you are literally a kulak.
Right. If you own a farm. And you basically need to give up 25% of it. Now, let's work through that logic. First of all, farms tend to operate they are the size they are because that's the scale to run the farm at. They don't work at subscale. You can't just hive off 25% of a farm and expect the 75% to be a at-scale farm that functions, right?
And after watching Clarkson's farm, it's because of the cost of the farm equipment.
Yeah. So you've got to spread that capital over enough land, but not too much that you can't work it. So if you suddenly start hiving 25% of a farm, where the hell does that leave you? Think about the other thing. Who do you sell that 25% to? So because if you're 75...
Bill Gates.
Yeah, well, I'll come to that. But if your 75 isn't particularly scalable, do you think some other guy's going to come along and start farming a farm that's 25% of your original farm? Clearly that doesn't work, right? So the best case scenario for your farmer is that your land is next to somebody else's and they can use it and they've got enough money and they can buy it off you. That's the best case scenario. But in that situation, right, what's the other farm going to bid? He's going to say, I'll give you 13 cents on the dollar. What's that worth? And you'll basically just have to take it because you've got no choice because you need to raise the money on this. But that probably won't happen either. I'll tell you how this will actually work in practice if you own something like a farm. Is that all these farmers are going to have to give up 25%, and they know that they can't. I mean, in some cases, there'll be literally nobody to sell it to, or they get rinsed on the dip.
So the state will take.
No, BlackRock will come up with a scheme. So BlackRock will come along and say, okay, we will buy 25% of your farm so you can pay this tax. We will set the price, and then you will rent from us the 25% back again. So basically, this is a state-sanctioned theft combined with a massive wealth transfer to somebody like BlackRock. And that's for a farm. You can do it for many businesses. You can do it for land. You can do it for property. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And in theory, they reckon this is going to raise them 400 billion, right? Which is a fifth of the gap that they got to fill between tax revenues and their spending.
I was going to say 400 billion still isn't that. It's not enough.
Well, and it won't raise that, of course.
Right, yeah,
they assume that nobody's going to change their behaviour. What will actually happen? So they tried to do this in France a few years back.
They all left, yeah.
Yeah, they said, turns out we're Russian now.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of wealthy French basically went to Russia. So this is my concluding thought on all of this. Right. We've seen a microcosm of this happening in America already, where basically Californians say, it turns out I'm a Texan or Florida now.
New York as well.
Yeah. Why can't that just happen on a country level?
Well, it can. It's happening in Britain right now.
Yeah.
Didn't we have like 1,000 millionaires fleeing the country last year?
And this is my question. Is the next big thing not going to be California to Texas or Florida? Is going to be the US to Russia or Europe to Russia or some other place?
Somewhere that's not going to just...
South America. Yeah.
That's why I never really blame rich people for holding their money in Jersey or Guernsey or the Cayman Islands or Luxembourg.
Oh, you want to keep it nimble.
Or make yourself a resident of Monte Carlo or something. Because it's just a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
The government's actually trying to steal from you. Okay, I'll just hold it in funds in Luxembourg then.
I mean, I'll give a fine...
You can't blame them. It's just normal.
I'll give a final
nature.
thought.
Yeah.
So that... it was my mousey thing that was not working anyway. If you look up in the top left-hand corner, there's the gap. It's basically 1.8 trillion. That's the gap that they've got to fund.
Jesus.
And the only way that they're able to do that, because the US is basically producing less and less as years go by. Yeah, they're producing less and less as years go by. The only reason they're able to make this work is because they're so financialized they can sell enough debt. If you destroy the capital markets, which this will do, that 1.8 gap is unserviceable. So how do you make it up? Well, you look at the row below that. You can either bin Medicare, Medicaid, or you can bin Social Security and half of defence. Close the gap. They're not going to want to do any of those things. And the US
That's just the gap. That will still leave you with a debt of 35 trillion.
Yeah, that's just so it doesn't get any worse year on year. But you're still left with the 35 trillion. But the US has been basically in this long cycle at this point of making less, financializing more, and now they're going to destroy the financialization part of it. So you won't be left with any tax revenues. So, they've got this model where basically they're using financialization to subsidize pouring corn syrup down the throats of £300 inner city women so they can waddle around fed, fat, and voting Democrat. And this system does not work when you blow up the financialization aspect, which is the only thing plugging that gap. So, I mean, if I've often said that Joe Biden is clearly the worst president of my lifetime. You could make an argument.
Kamala Harris might win.
Oh, easily.
Yeah.
So you could make an argument that, somebody like Woodrow Wilson or LBJ was a worse president overall, or, one of those early ones perhaps, right? Biden has been a bloody disaster. If Kamala whatever, I can never say her name, but if Kamala gets in, she is going to be so much worse than Biden. It's going to be ridiculous.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters. And if you want to see what else we're putting out, you can follow our series Lads Hour. We have a lot of fun behind the paywall. And if you haven't signed up and you still want to support us, you can donate. And also, if you want to see all the work we're putting out, we post links to it all on our Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.